When the serpent spoke to Eve in Genesis 3:1, was he speaking audibly or telepathically? If the serpent spoke telepathically to Eve but not to Adam, then Adam did not hear the serpent. Regardless of whether the serpent spoke audibly or telepathically, Genesis 3:1 reveals that the serpent spoke to Eve, but Genesis 3:1 does not say that the serpent spoke to Adam. And always remember that 1 Timothy 2:14 says, Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived. Furthermore, carefully meditate on the following facts. In Genesis 3:13, Eve said, "The serpent deceived me." However, in Genesis 3:12, Adam said, "The woman gave me fruit from the tree." Based upon a quick reading of those verses, we can understand the theory that Adam did not actually hear the serpent speak to Eve. Of course, we do want to know exactly where Adam was when the serpent spoke to Eve. After Eve had eaten from that tree, Genesis 3:6 says, she gave some to her husband who was with her. Adam was with her at that point in Genesis 3:6, but was Adam with her when the serpent spoke to her back in Genesis 3:1 through 5? We cannot really tell from Scripture, but there is no pluperfect Hebrew grammar in Genesis 3:6, which would mean Adam had been with her back in Genesis 3:1 through 5. Nevertheless, for purposes of instruction, we can hypothetically suppose that Adam had been with Eve when the serpent spoke to her back in Genesis 3:1 through 5. Suppose that Adam was standing 6 feet away from Eve, and suppose that the serpent was speaking audibly to Eve. If so, how many decibels loud was the serpent's voice? Was the serpent's mouth 24 inches from Eve's ears? And were Adam's ears 8 feet from the serpent's mouth? Was the serpent speaking just loudly enough for Eve to hear his speech, but not loudly enough for Adam to hear? Was Adam munching loudly on a pear while the serpent was speaking audibly to Eve? Did such loud munching contribute to drowning out the serpent's audible voice? It can be hard to hear some speakers if you are munching loudly on a pear. You get the idea. Several variables should be considered. Maybe the serpent spoke audibly to Eve, and maybe Adam was standing somewhere near to Eve, but Adam nevertheless could not hear the serpent speak, as did Eve. And yet we do not even know that the serpent spoke audibly. And that brings us to a specific subject. How well, anatomically, can a serpent speak? The 3 basic components of speech in humans is voice, breathing, and articulation. A snake's voice box is small and lacks human vocal cords, but snakes can hiss. Can snakes whisper? Breathing plus articulation? And that brings us to the subject of articulation. Lips, teeth, cheeks, and the tongue are among the human anatomical features that contribute to articulation in human speech. Look at this model of a human skull. If we want to say 33, The tongue presses against the teeth. 33. If we want to say 44, the lower lip presses against the upper teeth. 44. Those are just two examples, and I'm not going to go through the entire range of anatomical articulations in humans. You get the idea. Serpents do not have the oral anatomy that humans have. Serpents have forked tongues. Serpents obviously have different teeth that humans have, and serpents do not have human lips. All of this is apples and oranges. And that leads us to the subject of demons speaking telepathically. When was the last time that you heard a demon speak audibly to you? That would be real fun at night, right? Demons speak telepathically to humans. Maybe the serpent spoke telepathically to Eve, but not to Adam. Or maybe the serpent spoke audibly, loud enough for Eve to hear, but softly enough for Adam to not hear. One way or the other, maybe Adam did not hear the serpent speak to Eve. And remember that Genesis 3:1 does not say that the serpent spoke to Adam. Genesis 3:1 reveals that the serpent spoke to Eve. And remember the following verses. 1 Timothy 2:14, Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived. In Genesis 3:13, Eve said, the serpent deceived me. In Genesis 3:12, Adam said, the woman gave me fruit from the tree. Thus, it does not appear that Adam heard the serpent speak to Eve.